This is American Cemetery Live. Hello, this is Tom Nondorf from American Cemetery and Cremation Magazine.
And Ashlinn Goodman, Cemetery Solutions by Security National.
And we're here to talk cemetery stuff with you. It's everybody's favorite topic, right? I say this with a little bit of sarcasm. AI, right? Where can AI fit into your world? There's so much, that people say can be done with it. There's so much that has proven to be true. And there's so much that might be a load of, BS on some level. Ashlinn Goodman is out in cemeteries most days. You'll find her. I'm covering it for American Cemetery and Cremation. What do we think? Well, Ashlinn wrote a thing for us recently about using AI prompts to help out. So clearly you're on some level a believer in AI. Talk about kind of what you were going for with that piece that you wrote for us.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Everybody for a few years has been thinking, so is this whole thing going to take off or not? And spoiler alert, it's looking more like a yes than it is a no. And so, in order to be an effective leader, there are certainly some things that AI can take off of your plate. And for as many things as I do not like about AI, what I do like about AI is that it levels the playing field for everybody, meaning you have the same information as everybody else does, and now it's up to you on how you're going to use it. And so, like the article says, whether that's going to be, hey, here's everything that my family service counselors do in a week, what can be taken off of their plate and automated so that they can sell more, or whether it's creating an aftercare program or digital nurturing campaign for your cemeteries, there are things that can be done, and when used wisely, can definitely take your establishment to the next level.
So part of your article was, here are some prompts you can use for questions or issues you're having, maybe with your pre-sale staff or whatever. Let's just give an example. Say, okay, identify what's blocking sales time. Your prompt is evaluate the cemetery sales counselor's weekly tasks and identify which responsibilities could be reassigned, automated, or reduced to increase time spent on prospecting and follow-up. So that's just an idea of a prompt someone could use, right? Do
Yeah,
you see that as being something that if you were a worker, you'd be like, oh, they're getting AI on my case now to monitor my every move. Now they're going to tell me this is what you should be doing.
not necessarily, but certainly if I was somebody in management today who maybe did not come from the cemetery industry or the sales industry, I would do a little bit of learning or investigation on what my staff did on a day to day basis. And in order to help them, not hurt them, I might be curious to ask AI what of that seems like it could be delegated, what of that seems like it could be automated. Especially if the general role is a sales position, I would think that your staff would be more than appreciative of some of those non-income producing tasks being taken off of their plates.
It's not the old days of, what did you do with your day? Nobody knows exactly, but you made X amount of sales. And now you kind of have to know what's going on if you're running a business.
Absolutely, and you can even use AI to hold you accountable on that. Checking in with AI used to seem crazy and creepy and like I don't want this big brother thing. But listen, there are GPTs that you can create that say, hey, I want to be effective in my day. I want to be in charge of my time and my time not be in charge of me. So how do I create a schedule that works best for me, hold me accountable, check in with me, those types of things. It's not going anywhere, Tom. So how do we embrace it?
How do we embrace it? Well, we've embraced it. We're doing a little Chicken Little test here. I asked for fun, to I asked an AI platform, what is the biggest challenge for cemetery management in 2026? We're going to go down and see what we think. We are not either of us cemetery managers, so we'd love to hear your feedback. Some of this stuff is obvious. Some of this stuff is always going to be a challenge and always has been. Some of it can be overstated based on what we hear, but let's give our thoughts. Here's what AI says. Big challenge. Well, the core challenge is sustainability of the traditional cemetery model. Declining demand for burial revenue crisis. Well, that's certainly a challenge. Declining revenue, whatever you're doing. is always a challenge, and nobody's arguing that there is declining revenue. Are they, Ashlinn Goodman?
Well, I think one important distinction to make is what are you comparing it to? If you are comparing it to peak pandemic, yes, you may be noticing a decline. Most organizations that I work with are actually noting an increase, though, if they're comparing it to pre COVID. A couple of reasons for that. Number one, there's just more information out there. There are more people who are prearranged, right? And then the second is we're just doing a better job at getting to people. But if you are comparing it to those peak COVID times where people had an increased self awareness and they were all about it, you will continue to be disappointed. Do I think it's the hottest thing going? Do I think it's as hot as like buying the new iPhone? Not necessarily, but is it just all like hum and glum and nobody's doing it and woe is us in the cemetery world? Not at all.
Well, we saw amazingly positive numbers from some of the big boys in their revenue reports. And so that flies in the face of it. But also, we did a cemetery. You may have seen the results, and we'll be publishing more of these facts. But overall, we had a pretty high percentage of cemeteries amongst our readers who reported increased revenue, which was a little bit of a surprise because there's certainly that doom and gloom out there. But hey, there was something pretty positive. Now, I don't know, when you factor in what cemeteries get generally talked to about revenue, and sometimes it's ones that are just naturally declining, civic and municipal cemeteries and such. But I was surprised to see that remarkable fact of positive reporting from our survey. So,
Yeah.
is it even as bad as they say?
I don't think anything is as bad as they say, Tom.
Somebody told me that things are never as bad as they say. They're never as good as they say either. So as
Yeah.
long as you know that, it's a good sort of starting point to
Yeah.
mentally operate from. Um, Limited land and urban pressure. You're out there. What do you see out there?
Some do, some don't. I work with cemeteries that have 400 acres and they're offloading land like you wouldn't believe because maybe they do feel like that's far too much. And certainly, I work with as many cemeteries that feel that way, that feel they do not have ample space and they will be out within the next 5 years. And so, to that, I would say, because cremation is amongst us anyways, you've really got to focus on the vertical development. If New York City can figure out how to build more apartments, you can figure out how to build more niches.
I think part of what you say is the most important thing. It's going to be about creativity and using that cremation as the way forward, because cremation can build up. And we've got numerous structures and possibilities that we've all seen.
So true, and more beautiful than ever, truth be told. They used to look like little mailboxes, and now you can make them whatever you want, including a bird bath. And so I do just want on the record, that's what I want to be in, a bird bath.
In a bird bath.
You heard it first here.
Ashlinn, is that you? We'll continue our AI discussion next week. For now, let's get back out in nature. Hey, folks, I'm always interested in how cemeteries interact with their environment, especially their trees. I've got a special guest with me today from the University of British Columbia, Dr. Andrew Almas.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, I'm an associate professor of urban forestry, and here we are in a cemetery thinking about how it functions as a green space.
So, what makes cemeteries kind of a special place for those in urban forestry?
Well, cemeteries are unique in terms of land use within urban spaces. They tend to be spaces that are carved out prior to the development of a particular area, right? And this idea that we're going to carve out this space, we're going to change the land use so that it is a protected land use, which means that we have this protected land use and then we get all sorts of development that tends to happen around these spaces. Think Greenwood Cemetery, for instance, in Brooklyn, right? We're talking about 500 acres almost that are carved out, but at the time it was on the periphery of New York City. And so this idea being that, okay, over long periods of time, we get this development, but the land use for the cemetery stays the same, which means that whatever we decide to do with that land tends to also stay the same. So if we plant a tree, for instance, if we want a large shade tree, tends to be able to live there for a long time because the land use is not disturbed.
I think that's a great point. Something cemeteries themselves might undervalue about themselves is their power as a possible habitat for wildlife and trees and everything else that necessarily isn't protected as rural cemetery areas get developed.
Yeah, it's a good point. One of the interesting aspects really is this idea of continuity of land use. And so when you plant something, it tends to be able to stay there for much longer than if you were to plant in, for instance, a residential neighborhood. Because we know that residences tend to change hands every 5 to 10 years. And what happens when somebody goes and buys a new property? They want to make the greenery their own, which means oftentimes there's turnover of the trees that are there. There is an interesting study done in Cook County, Illinois, which looked at 10 parks, just normal city parks, versus 10 cemeteries in the same area. And they were looking specifically for certain traits associated with animal habitation. And in this case, they were looking at tree cavities. And what they found was that the cavities were the same generally in both types of parks and cemeteries, but that there were many more cavities in the trees in cemeteries, which is a really interesting finding because it indicates that those same trees are providing much more habitat than those city parks are.
It's almost like cemeteries have a unique opportunity because of the limits around their land use. You could get some pretty interesting things, in some ways better than you might get at a botanic garden.
Yeah, there are interesting examples, right? Because people come in and they often plant things associated with the grave sites. So for instance, you look over there and you've got 2 western red cedars planted randomly, and you give those 100 years, 150 years, and you're going to have 100, 150 foot trees.
I think it's great because, from my point of view, I'm always hearing people run down cemeteries as an environmental negative in some respects, but there's just as many studies out there, it sounds like, that show the environmental positives.
Yeah, definitely. When we look at how cemeteries function in terms of urban spaces, we see all kinds of studies which look at the positive ecosystem services that they provide, how there's more canopy cover in cemeteries than in the surrounding urban spaces, how they become these green hubs, these green lungs of the city in a lot of cases, and they really are a net positive for urban systems in general.
Don't let people talk smack about your cemetery, folks. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Tom.
I will see you at the cemetery.
Ashlinn, is that you?